We can edit, so no worries.
I don't like to.
Yeah, we don't like to edit.
It makes your job harder,
Makes my
huh?
job a lot harder, yeah.
I'll try to do my best here, but I am an engineer, not a movie star here.
Well,
This episode of Bourbon Pursuit is made possible through listeners like you, supported through Patreon, and with partnerships brought to you by the following. Shaker and Spoon is a monthly cocktail box that delivers the craft cocktail experience to your home with fresh ingredients and easy-to-follow directions. Get $20 off your subscription using code BOURBON at shakerandspoon.com. Hey everyone, last week we recorded the Kentucky Derby Museum's Legend series featuring the Hendersons of Angel's Envy, and there's still two more to go. They're going to be featuring the Nose of Jim Beam and the Colesbeans of Willett Distillery. To get tickets, make sure you go to derbymuseum.org and look for the Legend series. We added a coupon code called BP50. You can try it. I can't guarantee it's going to work anymore to get a discount on those tickets. This week, we gave away some Kentucky Bourbon Barrel Aged soy sauce and some Bourbon Aged spice tins to our Patreon supporters from the great folks over at Bourbon Barrel Foods. Check out their website and remember to eat your bourbon. This week was also the release of Neat the Movie. A lot of people on this movie have been past guests on our podcast featuring Marianne Barnes as well as Freddie Johnson of Buffalo Trace. So you can go to thebourbonmovie.com and look and be able to stream it on iTunes as well as Amazon. This episode is one that many of you have been begging for. We finally touch on Rickhouses, rackhouses, barrel house, whatever you want to call it, construction. This guest family is known for making essentially every rickhouse Kentucky bourbon is stored in with their unique design. He also gives us some information on why their design results in a better product compared to other producers who store their barrels on pallets. It's really a lot of great information, and I guarantee you're going to love this podcast. Remember, if you want to get these podcasts beamed to your inbox every single time it's released, go ahead, go to our website, bourbonpursuit.com, and subscribe on our email newsletter and our listserv, and you can get those immediately in your inbox as soon as they are released. Also, make sure that you are subscribing to us on iTunes, write those iTunes reviews, go to YouTube, make sure you're following us on YouTube, subscribe to YouTube, and also leave comments on YouTube. And as always, you can always listen and watch us on Facebook. With that, enjoy this week's episode. Welcome back to the episode of the Bourbon Pursuit Podcast, the official podcast of bourbon. Today, Ryan and I are trekking our way out to Bardstown. Where are you from again, Ryan?
Bardstown,
that's right.
I let everybody know that consistently to a fault.
Yeah, so everybody knows that Ryan's
I'm just
from,
proud.
Yeah, everybody knows that Ryan's from Bardstown, but this is one of the episodes that we had on our radar for quite a while, and then we kept on getting. We asked people for a while. They said, "What ideas? What kind of things do you still want to know and learn about with inside the bourbon realm?" We've had on master distillers, brand ambassadors, bloggers, authors. I mean, you name it. But this time, we're actually venturing out to something new because it's a completely new topic that is still very, very much bourbon related. But it is I don't know.
Bourbon.
It's not. It is not bourbon, but it is a very crucial part of the process.
Yeah, I mean, if you came to Kentucky and you see the warehouses and rickhouses where the bourbon's stored, there's a 90% chance that it, probably even higher than that is made by the Buzick family and the Blincoes. It's kind of cool, the whole story. I can't wait to talk to Donald about it, but how it kind of started and how it become, and with the boom, with all the warehouses popping up everywhere. So we've been getting a lot of interest. I think it's going to be a fascinating show because to be honest, I don't know anything about rickhouses or warehouses. And
neither do I.
Why the design works, why not just put them in a concrete building and
just like leave them there. Yeah, I know. And we're going to get all those answers because it was funny. I try to do a little bit of research for every show and try to figure out the right questions to ask. And this was one where I'm like, I'm dumb in the subject. I have no idea what to ask. And it's great because you can you can drive by all the roads, you can see all the Rickhouses, but you don't know why, right? And I think today is going to be a good explanation of the why of pretty much why they're there and how they're designed and all that good stuff. So today on the show we have Donald Blincoe. Donald is the president of Buzick Construction here in Bardstown, Kentucky. So Donald, welcome.
Well, thank you.
Yep.
Glad to be here.
So, at first, let's go ahead and just give an overview of the company. What is Buzick Construction? What do you guys getting your hands into? Stuff like that.
Well, Buzick Construction's based out of Bardstown, Kentucky. We're proud to be here too.
Best town ever.
That's right. Bourbon capital of the world. Well, my great-grandfather started Buzick Construction back in 1937, right after Prohibition. Story I've heard, he was helping Heaven Hill move a lot of distillery equipment, I guess right when they got started. So, and we're still working with Heaven Hill today. They've been a great client. But he started that, and it kind of snowballed into, well, can you pour foundations for equipment? And just kind of snowballed into a construction company. And if you're doing a lot of construction around distilleries, you're going to start doing warehousing. So there's a lot of Rickhouses and different kind of warehousing around the state. And, Buzick, we do more than just
What
distillery.
time period was that? I guess about your great-grandfather.
That was 1937 when it
Okay.
started. So we're in our 80th year, I guess, this year.
So after Prohibition, okay.
Right after Prohibition, yes, sir.
Gotcha.
So good. Keep going what you're saying there. So you.
Well, we do more than just Rickhouses. I mean, we've got we've got a lot of good means and methods to build them, cost effectively. But we also we've got 4 engineers in house. We're almost up to 250 employees. Plus, we're working a lot of temp labor. So we're working 350 people. So this bourbon industry is booming right now, and we're trying to keep up with schedule and keep everybody happy. We worked with the same clients, almost all the distilleries around here for years. So our goal is to keep them happy. But again, we do more than just distilleries too. I mean, we've built banks, churches. We've
Any commercial buildings,
any commercial building, factories. So I always kind of joke, we build buildings for people to drink and then churches for people to go. And,
Yeah.
it's full circle, right?
Yeah.
Circle of life.
It is. So, and it's a family business. I mean, my sister's in the office here. My brother is out in the field. My father's been involved in it from the get-go. He actually married my mother, it's her family's the Buzick name, and it's I'm a Blincoe. But it's been. Knock on wood, we've been busy here lately, so trying to work hard.
No, that's good. So let's roll back the past the history. So your great grandfather, that's when he kind of had a relationship with Heaven Hill. But the idea of the focus of this story and this podcast is really around the Rickhouse itself. Mm-hmm. So how were they storing barrels of bourbon? I mean, because there was bourbon and whiskey around before Prohibition, right? So was there an idea of a Rickhouse back then, or was it just storage in a warehouse? What was and by the way, first off, we need to say this: do you say Rickhouse or rackhouse? Because I've heard it 10 different ways.
I've said both kinds. I mean, I usually think of an individual rick where the barrel's going in, but I call the whole house the rackhouse, but that's just me. You can call it whatever you want to. It's kind of like bourbon, take it however way you like it. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so now we got that out of the way. So so your great-grandfather, Heaven Hill, had this relationship, but how are they storing barrels before this?
I know all the history like everyone else. It first started going down the Ohio River and stuff like that. Now, when the first Rickhouses or warehouses got built, they've been making bourbon since the late 1700s. I do know that there are Rickhouses that have been that are still standing today. I believe they were kind of built in the late 1800s. So they've been building Rickhouses and storing them this way for many years. Now, from the construction side. And they used to be difficult to build. When you get up tall, my father, he used to actually be out in the grounds and build them, and you'd have to pack up the lumber, by hand. Almost, you can imagine people almost building the pyramids. I mean, it was difficult work. They did finally start developing some stuff from conveyors and things to where you would get the wood up there, but it was very difficult. And there for a while, I guess back in the 80s, bourbon kind of died down. They weren't building Rickhouses, and then when it came back, I think we built our first one. in the case I'd call it the modern era in '91, and my father and I think it was Bailey Pressgrove, one of my longtime employees, kind of started coming up with better ways to build these, be more efficient. Safety's gotten to be such a big thing back in the day. Safety, OSHA maybe wasn't around or whatever, but so we've developed some different means and methods to do that. But I guess to answer your question, I think they've been doing rickhouses for quite a while. Now, there are other style houses they do today, pallet houses you'll see, and you also see sometimes where they'll just roll the barrels on a concrete floor and lay like dunnage on it and put the barrels on top of that. But there's a reason around here a lot of times people build the rickhouses. There's different things that they offer.
So I think I think that's probably our good subject to jump into. So what is it about a Buzick constructed rickhouse that offers something? And by the way, I think you also need to preface this with how entrenched you are into the market itself, right? Because a lot of people they might think of rickhouses, but they don't know that pretty much everything here in Bardstown is from you, which is pretty much all the big guys. You
or
guys
anywhere else.
Yeah, you guys are building around the country too. So how entrenched are you in the market?
Well, we've worked with almost every major distiller in the state in one capacity or another. I mean, we're doing projects constantly, and excuse me if I leave any out, but I mean, I mentioned Heaven Hill already. We're working for Beam Suntory, Maker's Mark's a part of them. Wild Turkey, we do work with them. We used to do a lot of work for Jack Daniels back when I was a little cruncher. We were like 2 years old. We were down there all the time for several years. We work for Buffalo Trace, Four Roses. We just built a whole distillery for Bardstown Bourbon Company and finishing one up for Lux Row Distillery. We've done some stuff for other distillers around. I guess our name, we've gotten known for this. So we went down to like Texas and did some work for F&R Distillery and Balcones. We've been up to New York for Black Dirt. I'm trying to think. I'm sure there's other people we've worked for. We worked for Brown Foreman again down at Woodford Reserve Distillery. We kind of went down there when it was just a dilapidated place and rebuilt that. Trying to think. 'Cause I hate if I've left somebody out here, but you kind of caught me on the spot. We do work for most of the distilleries, and we are kind of, I guess, known for the rickhouses because we've developed. We can get into that a patented way to do this that makes it safer and better and more cost effective. But I've got engineers here. We got, being around the industry, we've met the right people that know how to do bourbon. I think that's one reason bourbon is big in Kentucky is people know how to make bourbon. And so we found out who's good at it, and we've developed teams to go do design build projects for the whole process. So yeah, and I like to think we got a lot of good people, and we try to do what we say, and we try to value engineer things to be cost competitive, and I like to think that's why our clients like to come back to us.
Now, you named just every pretty much major distiller, like you said. Like, why is there no competition? Is it just like it's such a pain in the ass and you all have figured it out so well? Or like, why isn't somebody spun off and be like, well, we're going to compete against those guys?
Well, probably the main thing is my father and Bailey Pressgrove, I mentioned, when we first got to building this, they've developed what we call our jig, and we've got a patent on that. Kudos to my father for having the foresight to do that. And then basically when we built our ricks, we're able to build them on the ground, and you build them, you told me not to point at anything. We got the jig just right up there. I can show you sometime. But so we build it there, and you put your, what they call the dunnage, which is the kind of the horizontal member that the actual barrel runs on. We kind of put all that on one, on the jig there, and we put our bolts through, and then we actually put a crane. Hey, we've gone to tower cranes now. You might have seen them driving around, and you pick and you just put the ricks up there. I mean, my guys, they get after it sometimes. They put like 100 ricks up in a day. So it's just, from the cost competitive standpoint of that, and not only that, but the quality control, because they're building these rickhouses big now, and you get up 7 stories of this, and if you get that thing a little off,
yeah,
time you're up, and then they're putting like almost I guess the biggest ones we're building now are about 58,800 barrels per house, and they're about 550 pounds a barrel. So there's a lot of weight, and just from the structural side of, if you start getting off, you're going to have problems. So you got to keep quality control on it, and our jig allows us to do that. So
it'd be a bad case of Jenga.
It would be you see these, it kind of looks like Jenga.
Yeah.
And then quite frankly, in construction, people are used to the normal means and methods is to bid stuff out. And other people have tried to bid these, but with our means and methods, our labor force that knows what they're doing, we've every time anyone's ever tried to bid us out on these Rickhouses, we've beat them every time. So
It amazes me how, like you said, you got 4 going, and I think 4 on with Heaven Hill on Bardstown Road, and I drive that, and it seems like every time I pass, like in a month, one is complete, and I'm like, how's that possible? Like these, what you say, there's 60,000 barrels in there.
almost, yeah.
I'm just amazed at how fast that they popped up or whatever.
Well, it's, a lot of that goes to my labor force. They are excellent at what they do. I got a lot of great superintendents and, other managers on the site. Our laborers are good. It also goes, to our equipment. Today's means of construction is a lot different than when we're talking about those older style warehouses. We've got a lot of equipment on these job sites.
To say your great granddad, did he just have a nail and a hammer and just start wanting town or something? Or?
That's probably what they did. I mean, you can imagine their forearms from beating all those nails. Now we get big air compressors. It's like boom, boom, boom. You shoot it. So it's completely different. And that's probably another reason. There'd be a cost of getting in to compete with us is we have a lot of investment in equipment and whatnot to be able to build these efficiently. So
talk about a little bit. You had mentioned a little bit. You went pretty fast there. A little bit about the design of the Rick, and like what advantages does that actually give to the barrel in itself? And actually, who kind of thought of that as the way that this should be? How do you store the barrel? Because don't get me wrong, like. It could have just been dumb luck, because you hear all kinds of people that are tourists and they're like, oh, it's just because they have just this much distance is separated that allows the air to flow through and do this. And, it could just be whatever. But talk about that, like the design of the Rick, and if it actually does have an effect of the barrel, and who thought of that.
Well, I'm sure, I'm just going back again, when Bourbon started around the 1700s, they were probably storing barrels in Scotland much before that. I mean, barrels roll. So, and they're designed to lay on their edge and roll. So so I'm sure someone wanted to design a way to store the barrel that way. So what we do is we'll have, like, the floor has 3 barrels high. So we have our dunnage on there, and we design them with, Buzick has been around distilleries forever. So we've went in all these old warehouses. Now, several warehouses throughout the years have fallen.
Yeah.
If you let water get in there, you don't maintain do your maintenance on it, or if you don't design the warehouse with enough bracing and whatnot, they'll start leaning. Like, we install plumb bobs in all the warehouses because they're kind of like a ship. Again, you can have much weights in there. If you put it all in one corner, like on a ship, that ship's going to sink. Well, the warehouse, if you put all your weight in one corner, it's going to want to fail. The distilleries, they check their plumb bobs to make sure that they're not. They're kind of like a living animal. I know one of my main superintendents that builds these, he calls it like a Jerry Rogers. He says like a living animal. He goes out there and wood grows and shrinks and moves and stuff. So you got to know how to do that.
It's funny you say that, because I now remember actually going in and seeing that weight basically like dangling and kind of figuring out like what is that for, right? Now it's all clicking together.
Makes sense.
Yeah, it's and I don't know if all the distillers, everybody's so busy now, if they really. And everybody got so many, if they check those like they probably should, but that is what they're for.
Should be an add-on service for you.
To do that.
Come and inspect them.
Somebody needs to do it, most likely. But as long as these distillers, they know how to load these warehouses. It's common sense, basically. But I guess back to your question is, we've went to all the old warehouses and we've seen what works, what doesn't work. I got a chief engineer here, Kevin Aldred, that he's kind of went through and ran all the numbers and how much bracing we need, and how much tolerance you need for the barrels and that kind of thing. One thing that makes it easy is that, the barrels are pretty much standardized at 53 gallons. Now, several years ago, probably several decades ago, they had smaller barrels, and I think they keep wanting to make these barrels a little bit bigger just for cost effectiveness or whatever. And we've built barrels for different companies with bigger size. As one company maybe I left off, the brandy company in Louisville. I'm sorry, it's
Copper King.
Yeah, we did some work down for them, and they wanted to do some bigger barrels. So we've done things like that. But again, it's just the barrel is designed to be on its end, on its bilge, I guess. Now, some people do like pallet warehousing, which is a more economical way to store bourbon. It's basically just a pre-engineered box. You just go pour a slab, build a box. Now, then you have to turn them on their end, and you build pallets, and then they stack them up. Now, a barrel is going to kind of like want to bulge out when it puts a lot of weight, so you'll have more losses that way. I've heard that in those pallet houses, and when I've been in them, I don't know if y'all have been in a Rickhouse. You go in there, and like
I've
in the
been to
summer,
the top of one, and it's like been top of one at Willits, and it scared the shit out of me. You know, just
from the
out.
height.
Yeah, well, the height, looking all down all the wood, hearing the creaking and cracking. You know, you're just like, all right, hope this holds me. But you look around, and there's plenty of 53-gallon, barrels or whatever, so you feel a little bit
it's
better.
going to hold you. But my point was going to be, if you ever gone in there like in the summer or the winter, the temperature is just extreme.
Yeah, the top and the bottom,
Oh, it's different. And what I've noticed myself is in a rick house, like the first 2 floors, it stays more kind of temperate. I would say it's more like a pallet house. It's almost like storing aging bourbon in a basement of a house or something.
Yeah, whenever I used to weed eat for this landscaper when I was in high school, and we would weed eat around the Heaven Hill warehouses, and you'd get by a window, and it was like AC almost would blow out, and you're like, how's that possible? And, all this cold air would just rush out of there.
Well, it's the thermodynamics. I mean, throughout the winter, the bourbon, will actually, it'll all get to that temperature colder, so that when it heats up in the summer, you got all that mass that's got to change. So that's, I guess, what works the magic. I think that's a lot underappreciated on bourbon. What makes bourbon so great in Kentucky, especially with the weather patterns we have, is the aging of it. And, a rick house, in my opinion, one thing that makes it great, and a lot of these distillers still want to spend the extra money to build these instead of the pallet houses, just the different quality whiskeys you can get. I mean, you can make the same distillate, same mash bill, and store it in like one of the first 2 floors, or store it in the middle of the house, or store it in the top. And even if you store it for the same amount of years, you're going to get a different product.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what, and people are having all these premium things versus your typical bourbons. And, what I've heard from different distillers, but some of them believe like the middle of the warehouse is kind of like the center cut, almost like a piece of beef or something. That middle is what you want. Some people would prefer like the top part. It's like aging like up in an attic space of a house where it's really getting hot and cold, and probably aging it quicker. And I've heard that on these rick houses with the thermodynamics, the bourbon actually ages faster than in a pallet house, or even on one of my rick houses, the first 2 floors are kind of like that too. They're not going to see the temperature swings, but as you go up, you get a lot more of those temperature swings, and that kind of magic kind of happens in the barrel.
So, yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
Well, I was going to say, like, you're saying the different levels, like, Buffalo Trace or Four Roses is a good example. They only build like 5 or 6.
1 story, yeah.
Yeah, or one
it's
story.
2 stories.
2 story, okay.
Mm-hmm.
2-story high versus, the ones Heaven Hills are like, God, 30 stories. I don't know. Why do they prefer that versus, the taller?
Well, I hope I'm not saying anything they don't want me to say, but I've heard them say before that they like, their idea is just the evenness of the bourbon. They want more of a consistent aging.
Okay.
They're not looking to get, I guess, the different products. No, that was their decision, to do that. Some of the different distillers are like, my quality stuff, I got to have this rick house because the good stuff comes from the middle or top, and that's what we got to have for that. So,
yeah.
And I'm not at all saying that Four Roses is not as good bourbon, but it's just a different distillers, is different opinions on everything. But and maybe they age theirs longer in that to get to the same aging profile. But that's,
do distillers come to you and say, what do you think's best, or are they pretty much like, well, this is what we want, or do you kind of like lean them and kind of like, this is the way you should design this new rick house? Or
we'll give them, I guess, our opinion if they ask, and I'll challenge them sometimes. What's the dunnage length for how many barrels you make, and then how do you want to access your barrels, and how do you want to move your barrels up and down? We do, material hoists, or some people do escalators, and so I guess to some point, but everybody's kind of got their opinions on what they like. A lot of people think, the rick houses are, I guess, a little bit more. You have more injuries, people getting their fingers, I guess, crushed by a barrel versus a pallet house where you're moving them with forklifts and that kind of thing. So some people, I guess, not that people don't want anybody to get hurt, but some people may want to maybe sacrifice the quality of the aging for that. So everybody's got different goals in mind. And you know, a rick house is, or just the aging, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. The time of year, I mean, you always hear wine, like, you know, the vintage 1980 this and that was good. Well, nobody really talks about that with bourbon, but in my opinion, you know, corn's different. The you know, a barrel put in, especially in a rick house where you get the different flavors from, you know, the weather. You know, you get certain, like a hard winter one year, that can really change the profile. And, you know, nobody really discusses that much, but I'm a firm believer that, you know, it's the thermodynamics of that bourbon moving in and out of the wood. And if you don't get the changeover in temperatures, you're not going to get that happen.
Does the outside of the rick house matter? Like, you know, some have stone or brick, or, you know, the aluminum siding or wood siding, whatever it is.
I'm sure to some extent it does.
Or why would you pick one over the other?
Now, some would be aesthetics. You know, if somebody wants something to look one way or another. Again, for simplicity, it gets down to thermodynamics. You know, and if one thing's getting more keeping that heat transfer, it's not going to age quite. It's going to age differently, not as fast. Some people do heat the warehouses and they try to cycle, you know, that through. You know, I've seen this way before my time. You can maybe see here in Bargetown, Heaven Hill had some warehouses where they tried to heat them. I hear you get a lot more angel share loss when you do that. So it's what I've heard. But so some people do try to do that. But
Brown Foreman's pretty well known for basically doing the heat cycling their warehouses too.
Yeah, I think they went more to these pallet houses with heat cycling. I'm just only speculating because we haven't really built those. That you know, I've heard kind of.
Haven't got any orders from them.
Well, we've worked for them, but I've heard, you know, I think they're one of the ones that, you know, we don't want to risk anyone, you know, getting a finger hurt, so we're going to palletize these and we're going to heat and cool them. But to me, I mean, the natural Kentucky weather, I mean, that's not really going
the extreme,
you know,
highs and lows.
Green, you're going to pay to do that, and you're going to have more losses. And I mean, I've never really heard anyone getting, I mean, the worst thing, you hurt a finger rolling a barrel. I mean, I can hurt my finger, you know, designing a building with.
I can do jumping jacks after this.
I've done it hanging a picture.
So, you know, not to be callous or anything, but that's one thing I've heard through the industry. But
so you've talked a little bit about the pros and cons of your system versus palletized, and I kind of want to just touch on that a little bit more. This episode of Bourbon Pursuit is made possible through listeners like you, supported through Patreon, and with partnerships brought to you by the following. I've said it before on the show that when I go out to restaurants, I hardly ever buy a pour of bourbon because I like to experience handcrafted and custom cocktails. But really, it's just an excuse because I'm a terrible bartender and can't make a decent Manhattan by myself. But that's all changed thanks to Shaker and Spoon. Shaker and Spoon is a monthly cocktail box that delivers 3 brand new original recipes created by world-class bartenders with all the ingredients including syrups, bitters, mixers, garnishes, and more for 12 cocktails. I received the Austin Without Limits box and it had everything I needed. I just supplied the bourbon. Each box revolves around one type of liquor and can use up an entire bottle. So learn how to impress all your friends with more than just your bourbon bunker by creating excellent craft cocktails from Shaker and Spoon. Get $20 off your subscription using code BOURBON at shakerandspoon.com.
The State of Logic podcast is like no other. We don't have the same focus as so many other podcasts where we're just going to talk about business or politics or whatever. We talk about everything with everyone, intellectuals, comedians, and celebrities alike. Sometimes it's a 20-minute interview. Sometimes it's a 3-hour interview. But at the end of the day, it's a great conversation that we often laugh about and learn something from at the same time. Come check us out at the State of Logic podcast.
So you've talked a little bit about the pros and cons of your system versus palletized, and I kind of want to just touch on that a little bit more. You know, is it more economical to go palletized?
It is.
Is it okay? So that was an easy one, right? Just because it's just less wood involved, less space, just less construction. Because it really is. It's just like this very sturdy pallet. They just keep stacking barrels on top of vertically, right?
That's right. And I haven't obviously ran the numbers like I would if I was a distiller. The actual building itself is much cheaper just to build an empty box, pre-engineered building. I mean, they build them every day. Whereas a rick house, if you see the labor force I have, I'll have 40 people or more out there building these things. And the amount of wood, I mean, there's like a million board feet of wood that go into some of these things. And it's just, it's an operation to build these. But once a rick house is built, as long as you keep it dry, that thing is going to operate, like it's supposed to forever. A pallet house, you do have to, if you do life cycle costs, you got to rebuy these pallets every so often, and there's a lot of expensive equipment you have to be able to lift these barrels and that kind of thing. And then also, I've always heard you get a lot more losses, as I mentioned earlier, with a pallet house.
Yeah, does it age any different since it's vertical versus to the side?
Well, I've heard from different distillers that they think it ages quite a bit different, and again, I think it all gets down to the thermodynamics. I mean, a pallet house is usually only, I'm trying to think how tall they are, roughly 20 feet, 25 feet or something like that, whereas a rick house gets up to, almost 60 feet. And if you ever go into a pallet house, they stack these things in there like, tight. Mm-hmm. You can't get the airflow to let the thermodynamics. Now, again, they try to get, they call them the big ass fans or something or equivalent of that, yeah. Or like I said, Brown and Forman's trying to heat and cool them, so they're trying to do that, but
replicate it. But
you're trying to replicate Mother Nature, and
it's like irrigation. It never quite works as good as rain.
That's my opinion, but again, you're talking to someone that built rick houses.
Yeah, exactly.
So talk about your system. You had mentioned elevators and stuff like that. Your system of actually being able to, say, move barrels around. So, how does that process work? Like at a palletized warehouse, it makes sense, right? You get the forklift, you pick them up, you move them over, right? But this, and not only that, I think you have to give the credit where credit is due. When you look at your system and you look at it and you walk in there, it's a work of art, it's craftsmanship when you look at it, right? And so this is the other way I kind of want to see is when you need to move a barrel, it's just somewhere in I don't know, row S, bay 2, wherever. I don't know how the numbering system goes, but how do you pull a barrel out of the middle there to go and dump it or anything like that? How do you move stuff around?
Well, on a rick house, and that is one advantage of a rick house is you can get access to your barrels a lot easier. You put them into a pallet house, they stack them in there, and if you want to get that barrel in the back corner, you got to unload a whole lot of barrels just to get that one. In a rick house, you would only have to unload, I think our biggest rick houses we're building have maybe 25 barrels in a run. Now, one distiller has actually, you can access the barrels from both sides of the rick. Most distillers only want to do it from the center aisle. So, they'll just go, and there's a lot of them gone to these RFD tags, I think they're called, where, they've got them computerized, they know exactly where that barrel is. And they'll get machines, it's called like a ricking machine or a jerry hoist. They can raise that 550-pound barrel up. It's about, 4 feet or whatever to get to that top rick on a floor. And they'll just, get that barrel down, and we put little boards on the ground where the barrel rolls, so you don't really have to touch it too much. And in a rick house, you just go maybe unload, up to 20 barrels and get the one you want. So you just kind of rolling those barrels around like they're designed to do.
You talked about maintenance a lot already. Give me an idea of what sort of maintenance actually goes into a rick house, once it's there, because you've mentioned before that some of them have collapsed over time because of not taking care of weather patterns or stuff like that. And I'm assuming these are built to last for a long, long time, right?
Oh, if they stay dry, I know of rick houses that are over 100 years old. The main thing is water. Water causes problems in about anything. So if you keep them dry,
anything with the word house and water is just always bad news.
It's
right?
not good news. So you keep them dry, they'll last. Maintenance wise, you've got like the plumb bobs we talked about. You kind of want to make sure the building's staying fairly true. Keeping a roof on it. And one thing that most of the distillers do, and they are on different schedules, is you want to get that the thermodynamics again. So we install windows that are they open and close. So they'll generally during part of the year they open the windows, and some may open the bottom and top windows, some open all the windows. Again, they all gets down to theory on how much airflow you want or how you want it to flow. And then they'll close the windows to hold the heat in at certain times of the year, different things. So that's kind of a maintenance issue there, is opening and closing the windows to make the magic work in the rick house. I'm trying to think what else maintenance they might do.
Will there be a future of smart rick houses with a nest or something you get the temperature, you open the windows automatic, what do you think the future rick houses, like you said, been 100 years. What I guess
What's next?
what's next for them? You know,
I mean, everybody's always looking to cut labor costs. So, they do make what's called escalators now that kind of is basically a vertical escalator like you would see at the airport where you roll the barrel on, it takes it up and down. It's faster and it can move it. You could probably even actually design that to be mobile to where it would go up and roll into it. So you could probably even today design a Rickhouse to be where the barrel would almost get out automatically, but I mean the costs associated with that would be extreme. I don't know that the payback would ever be there. Again, bourbon's kind of, there's been a lot of people who've been trying to artificially age bourbon now, doing like by sound or whatever. And it's just hard to beat Mother Nature. It's kind of, bourbon's one of those things that they've been doing it since 1780.
Trying to defy it.
Yeah,
and they can't.
These people back in the day making bourbon were not dumbasses. I mean, they kind of knew what they were doing. And, everybody thinks everybody's smarter today. We do have the technology. But I think, in my opinion, bourbon's one of them things that it's best to...
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
I'm sure people will keep trying, but it's going to be hard to beat the way it's been done for over 200 years now.
Yeah.
So what kind of manpower is involved, right? I mean, when you start a project, you bid it, you win, and from the day one of, either, I'm assuming you pour foundations, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so when you pour the foundation and then you get to the point of actually constructing. So how many people are involved? What goes in the process?
And how much materials?
Yeah.
That's what I was interested in, yeah.
Well, like any project, I mean, you got to do your engineering up front. We've built a lot of these Rickhouses the same way. Kevin's design is carried over to whatever size. You'll have to get your soil tested, your site work done. You got to pour your concrete. You got to have all that tested, your rebar. And then we start going up with the wood. Most of the wood, a lot of it's sourced locally in central Kentucky. Some of it's pine from down south. So you got to order all your materials. I got office people that take care of all that. And then there's about 40 people in a big warehouse, even a small one. We say small now is 20,000 barrels, but that takes about 20 people on that. And then we go and put the sheet metal or whatever cladding on it. And from start to finish, you look at how many different people touch that thing, from the electricians to the hoist operators. I mean, there's probably over 100 people in each house that have something to do with each warehouse. And as far as your question on material, I mean, like on these big ones, there's over 1 million board feet of lumber. There's, don't hold me to these numbers, but there's probably 20,000 bolts that go into it. Probably, I don't know how many nails, 100,000 nails that go into it. I mean, it's a lot of material.
What does one of these cost, if you can share it, or if you can say?
It's over $100 per barrel space typically, and if you go smaller, it gets quite a bit up from there. It's actually probably $110 a barrel.
It's another reason why
or more.
I just see it like impossible to get in the bourbon game. Like, not only you gotta make products, sit on for 6 years, you gotta build these warehouses and all that. It's like crazy the costs that are associated with it.
Absolutely. So when you are building it, like, what's the sustained weight? Like, how deep you have to go to pour a foundation to be able to know that if each one of these barrels is 550 pounds and we're going to have 30,000 barrels in here, like, where's that math? Like, how do you try to figure out?
Calculus class.
Yeah.
The TI 83.
I was just playing the snake games back then.
Yeah, it gets back to my engineering. I mean, it's the same kind of engineering you do on any building. It's just on a bigger scale, and you just size your foundations to distribute your load, and you got to have the right soil compacted, and that it can handle that load. One thing I guess I do want to hit on for kind of how a building goes. You got to get your building permits, and I want to give kudos to the state building code on that. Back when we first started building these back in 1991. The state building code is based on like an international building code, and quite frankly, nobody around the world that I'm aware of builds these warehouses like we do in Kentucky. So the state was like, man, what is this? This doesn't fit our building code. So we would have to ask a lot of variances, and we had to go down there and work through with them. And they let us build them. But when we started booming like this, we actually worked with Beams and the Kentucky Distillers Association, and all of them went to the state and actually got a whole section of the building code written to allow the construction of such a massive wooden high hazard building. And kudos to the state for, I guess, helping the bourbon industry. Without them letting them build that, it would be much more difficult.
Yeah.
You had mentioned during the building process itself, you said we have to get electricians in here. And Ryan and I, we did an episode actually at Wild Turkey inside
Rickhouse.
of a rick house, and it was a pain in the butt to even figure out where can we even find an electrical outlet, right? So,
because you can't have much electricity around.
yeah, I mean, let's get it right. Yeah, these are pretty much like unmanned locations, right? You don't want a whole lot of just electric circuits running around. So what's the idea of not, because apparently people had even said that a lot of times electricity is even retrofitted into these buildings because they are so old. Is that true or false?
I'd say some of the older ones, that's probably true. I mean, like I said, some's been around for over 100 years. Now, I myself have not familiar with that happening, but I'm sure it's happened. I mean, with these ricking machines that you got to have to get that barrel up 4 feet, I mean, you can imagine lifting 550 pounds and 4 feet. Back in the day, I think they used to have to have a ramp, and some big guy would roll a thing up there. But now you got to be able to plug that machine in. The way we design them now, we got to have Class 1, Division 2 rated electronics in there. Alcohol vapors, obviously can have problems with electronics, and they settle. So if you're so far above the barrels, you don't really have to have that. But most of the electronics in there are all rated electronics, your ricking plugs, your lights, and things like that.
Yeah, I always find it interesting that like when you look at the lighting in there, they're just regular like A19 bulbs that are sitting around there. You don't have like these big shop lights where everything's nice and lit up for you, right? So what's the idea of kind of having a minimalistic just lighting inside of these things?
One is probably for not trying to have too much electronics. Another is the way we design these. We line the windows up with the catwalks, so the lighting goes through there. Back in the day, I don't know if it's so much this way anymore. They used to always work in the Rickhouse in the summer or during daylight hours. So, the light would come in through the windows and you'd be able to see. Now, some people put lights on every floor. Some people don't. They just put lights on one floor. A lot of times people wear little, lights on their head. And another would be, for not lighting it up, like an office building would probably just be, again, cost because, this is, again, one reason I think the state let us build these warehouses so big here is that, these warehouses, you go put your barrels in here, so you're working crazy inside of them for maybe a month. But after that, you lock the door and you maybe come back in, 4 or 6 years, nobody's in there. Mm-hmm. So why do I want to spend a whole lot of money on lighting when it's just sitting there not being used?
Yeah, I mean,
makes sense.
That even kind of almost answered my next question because I was thinking like, what other amenities do people ask for, right? Like, I don't know if it's like running water or anything like that. Is like, there is anything like that's kind of crazy, like off the wall that people ask to have installed in their rick houses?
Mini fridge.
Mini fridge.
Well, with bourbon tourism blowing up, we've recently done some work on Barstown Bourbon and Lux Row in particular. I know other distillers are taking people through. We've worked on Beams and Makers taking tours through these warehouses. I gotta say what people are asking for now though is getting each person is wanting to go more elaborate what you're wanting to do in these warehouses, and it gets kind of tricky from a building codes perspective because these are high hazard buildings with a lot of liquid in them,
flammable liquid.
Yeah,
by getting off the wall, are we talking like buffalo traces where they want the roof to be able to basically retract and come back on? Like how crazy are they talking here?
Yeah, I mean everybody would like to push the envelope to outdo everybody. And I think you're going to start seeing even more of that as this bourbon tourism catches on. A lot of it's just centered around the tourists wanting to come in there, and you've probably been to Maker's Marks where you're sitting in there tasting inside of the right beside that rick house where you got the glass there and that kind of thing. So they're just kind of, I guess, maybe copying that idea and taking it as far as they can.
I was about to say, I was like, is there ever like a Friday afternoon brainstorm session where you guys just have a drink and you're like, all right, we need some off the wall ideas we can go and pitch to these companies and see who's going to bite, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we usually let the owner come to us and say what they're looking for, and we'll kind of challenge them and see what we can do and that kind of thing. But it's going to get to a point where the building officials, as good as I was giving them some props for trying to help the industry, at some point they're going to say, you're kind of going a little too far here.
Yeah.
So, kind of wrapping up a little bit towards the end here, but I kind of want to understand, from the very beginning to what it is now, it seems like it's been a pretty consistent process. Has the engineering process changed at all? Is there a reason why that everything's still wood-based? A lot of people like to go to steel beams in their own houses to, it can support a lot of weight and all this other kind of stuff. So has the engineering process changed at all, or those ideas ever came about?
Yeah, I mean, we've looked at metal, building them out of metal before, but cost is a ramification there. And in fact, the metal, I guess the angel share or something, it'll start corroding the metal more than it will. The wood will actually last longer than metal, believe it or not, even if you galvanize the metal. We've seen some older warehouses that the metal don't last as long. Somebody might think, well, man, you're putting a flammable liquid in there and a flammable, in wood. That's not a good idea. When in actuality, I actually worked on the Heaven Hill after the Heaven Hill fire, and I saw where the metal, when it's loaded, if it heats up at all, it gets weak and it'll just fold. Where a big heavy timber like we use, it'll kind of char, but it'll keep its structural property. So really, the wood will stand longer than the metal. So, the big key that we're still doing it the same way is cost. Wood's just a whole lot less expensive. We have so much wood around here now. If you were out in another place where wood wasn't available, that might be a problem. But now I will say, things that have changed, one would be safety in the construction of these. Safety in construction over the last 15 years or so has really a lot more than it used to be. I don't know if it's just being enforced more or whatever, but we've had to find ways to build these buildings much safer. We've developed, safety rails, and we've got safety boards and all kinds of things to try to keep our employees safe. And also we're installing things in these buildings now, like safety chains for, you said when you were up in a warehouse, you felt, man, I'm going to fall through.
Yeah.
Well, we're putting stuff up now that when the barrels aren't there to keep you from falling through, that kind of limits any danger like that. So, we're trying to make these as safe as possible.
I think you guys should install like a zip line experience then.
That'd be pretty cool, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would be cool. Yeah.
Get to smell the bourbon when you maybe take a little nip when you're going through.
Or a big fire pole that goes all the way down one side, slide all the way down.
Yeah.
Like Ghostbusters.
Yeah, that would be fun. That would be fun. So, Don, I want to say thank you again for joining the show today. I think we hit on a lot of good subjects here because this was something that I honestly had no idea about, right? I mean, yeah, sure, I can swing a hammer and put some nails in a wall and stuff like that, but, understanding what it takes to stand one of these up, the idea, a lot of the engineering, the history behind it as well, it's been really good. It's been really good. It's been awesome.
Yeah, I've been a family friend of the Blincoes and Buzicks my whole life, and I really never
no surprise there, right?
Knew much about the Rickhouses and what goes into them, and so it was pretty cool to kind of finally pick your brain about it. So I appreciate you taking time.
Well, you're welcome anytime, and thank you all. And I'd like to say thank you. We couldn't do what we do here at Buzick without our awesome employees, without the partnerships with our distillers. Hopefully they keep making fantastic bourbon and the industry keeps growing. And I just hope everybody keeps drinking bourbon because,
I think you got job security for a while. It seems like it.
Yeah. So if people do want to get in contact with you and learn more about your company, how can they do that?
We have a website. You can probably Google Buzick Construction. I think it's teambuzick.com, and you can go there, and our phone number's on there. And
That's
glad to answer any questions they have.
And that's Buzick, right? So if
That's right.
Anybody that wants to look at it. So Don, I want to say thank you again for coming on the show today. It was great. If you do like the show, make sure you write a review on iTunes, support us on Patreon, patreon.com/Bourbon Pursuit. Follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram @Bourbon Pursuit. And make sure you fill out that audience survey. So go to bourbonpursuit.com/survey so we can learn more about your, basically where he builds all these rackhouses, whatever you want to call them. And you can understand, we want to understand why you're buying the bourbon that you do.
Yep. So we can sell it to you.
Yeah.
Or sell it to distillers. No, if you have any show suggestions, feedback, comments, we love them. This was actually a show suggestion. I should have thought of this a long time ago, but one of our listeners said, hey, can you have somebody that builds Rickhouses on? So it kind of gave us this idea, and I luckily knew the person to call. So appreciate that, and we'll see you next time.